Um, I just watched a fascinating talk by Luca Turin, who's famous for developing a quantum frequency model for smell. And the title of the talk is about like harmony or something, and he talks about music and relating that to the frequency of the molecules, the quantum frequency. And he says that music is not about the fundamental. And I found that really fascinating because technically he is correct that based on a scientific mathematical understanding of Western music, it's definitely not about the fundamental. But if you're actually trained in music, as I was trained from a young age, it's all about the fundamental. Because, for example, whatever your fundamental tone is in whatever song you're learning or piece, then that defines the pitch ratios. So if you have an F and it's below the fundamental tone, then that F is a perfect fifth if the fundamental tone is C. But when the F is above the fundamental tone, then it's a G. I mean, it's a perfect fourth. So it's a perfect fifth below the C, and it's a perfect fourth above the C. So obviously, the fundamental tone defines all the harmonic ratios, the harmonic pitches. Now the problem is that that's from a listening perspective, but technically, mathematically, the harmonic ratios are the equal temper tuning, and so the fundamental tone is technically just an X as geometric magnitude, and that originates from Platonic philosophy and before Plato, or a contemporary of Plato with Archytas. So the Archytas relied on an equation of the geometric mean squared equals the arithmetic mean times the harmonic mean. And so the octave is then the geometric mean squared, and the arithmetic mean is the perfect fifth, and the harmonic mean is the perfect fourth. And based on that definition, then yes, there's no fundamental tone. because you're secretly relying on a different fundamental tone to define the harmonic mean as the perfect fourth. And I'm not going to go into all the mathematical details, but so technically Luca Turin is correct, but my whole claim is that the perspective of listening as a musician, relying on the truth of the fundamental tone, is actually the truth of of reality, reality as science. So, and it turns out this is what's called non-commutativity in science. And so then Luca Turin, was a 3-hour talk with the couple that interviewed him, and they had a fascinating talk about what he believed to be the explanation for how memory is stored in the brain and the basis for consciousness and self-awareness. And he pointed out that it can't be based on electrons because they're not stable enough. They're change around too much. And so then he realized it's based on the I guess it would be the protons of the mitochondria, something like that. I didn't quite understand all the specifics, but his other argument is that the sense of smell has to do with the spin lining up, and so that it happens as a resonance. And so that led them into a discussion about because the resonance would be a non-local entanglement of the spin, and so they discussed different quantum models, and they actually just basically discussed Ruth Kastner and the transactional model from John Kramer, and then Lucas Turin said, well, there's a lot of different models, and the Kramer model still needs to be tested better, and needs to have more equations and stuff, and then I started to realize that he didn't really seem to understand quantum physics that well in real detail. And he just said that, qubits are too complicated. And he talked about anesthesia for quite a long time. And what was strange is he never mentioned microtubules, so he didn't seem to be aware of Stuart Hameroff's research with anesthesia. So I sent his link talk to Stuart Hameroff, and then they talked quite a while about just some sort of general kind of stuff, like it was a bit vague. But then at the very end, they mentioned how people weren't very popular because they questioned global warming science, and that people who agree with mainstream global warming are actually, they just want to save the planet. And then Luca Turin actually agreed with them. He was like, he brought up the problems with global warming, and he just repeated the literally this fake science that big oil had created. And he literally repeated like the same specific, like, right-wing corporate lie that combined these two different graphs that were wrong. And he mentioned the same story that I heard a neighbor of mine actually tell me this exact same story, that, obviously this has been in the corporate media, and I already debunked it on my blog. And I was just shocked that this guy, he said he was at a meeting at the Perimeter Institute for some conference, and global warming came up in a conversation around, they were sitting, like, having a meal around a table, and he made some joke about it, and then he said, like, nobody wanted to talk to him for like over an hour after that. And but it made me realize that, and then he got mad, and he said that, scientists need to prove to him that global warming is real for whatever reason. He doesn't. And suddenly I realized that it's like you can have a whole career in science and yet be so specialized that you're clueless about other, disciplines in science, just because you want to be clueless, because you don't have to study those areas. So it was, it's like he started out with the wrong definition of music, and then he ended with a completely erroneous like lie about global warming science. He is just like repeating what he wanted to hear. And then at some point during the talk, he said that he wasn't a good enough student to study physics, and he had gone into biology, and then he studied physics on his own after he was already a research scientist in biology, and that he said that that's true for any biologist, that they're just not good enough in physics. And that's sort of like the that's the stereotype about that, how physics is the foundation of reality. But Nobel physicist Brian Josephson, he came around it the other way. He realized that biology is more foundational than physics. And so I've enjoyed my conversation with Nobel physicist Brian Josephson. I haven't heard back from him, and probably won't, but but we did correspond. I don't know, maybe like 6 times or something over 5 years or whatever. It's not like I wasn't like pestering him all the time or anything. So anyway, so yeah, I posted a bunch of YouTube comments as a YouTube troll. But the people who hosted the podcast, I think I sent an email maybe to one of them. Not sure which one it was, because they run it as a couple. But their claim was that people approach them with their unique scientific claim or model or whatever, and their advice is that you should be able to make friends with other researchers who have similar interests, and that really the only way a scientific model can succeed is through friendship and collaboration and stuff. And I thought that was an interesting way of not engaging with a scientific model necessarily, because I made the example of Guy McPherson, the conservation biologist, and his claim or his model of accelerating biological annihilation has just like made him ostracized. But nevertheless, his model is still valid. It didn't require him to be friendly with people, or like a model by definition doesn't require like friendly social relations. Like, I'm pretty sure Newton was pretty much a loner. I'm not advocating, I'm not like a pro Newton person. I mean, obviously he was, whatever you want to call him, but mastermind or something. But I think he was like pretty much of a hermit. anyway, so it's kind of ironic that they're telling people that they need to be friendly, but then when it comes to global warming, they're like, oh, those scientists, they just want to save the planet. Like, as if it's mutually exclusive, that if you want to save the planet, then suddenly you're not being scientific, And then they brought up the paradox that his model of smell, that it relied on actually smelling the chemicals, and so that wasn't science if you relied on your actual perception to do it instead of just something more objective. And yeah, it's a bit paradoxical, because if you're studying smell, you're probably going to have to rely on smell at some point. People smelling, even if it's some kind of like statistical average or something. And I liked how he said that he would rather have a model that wasn't statistical. And then he used the example of spin, but he seemed to think of it in terms of statistics, like, because that's how people normally think of quantum physics. And I've already, obviously I've already like pushed the non-commutativity model to this couple that do their podcast. But just like with global warming, it's going to take quite a bit of effort to study the topic on your own, just like any other thing. When you study something, it takes time and effort. So I'm not saying because they're socially friendly, maybe because they're too friendly with each other. I don't know. Maybe they're limiting each other. I don't know. But so that's just how it is. People have their own views about things, and luckily there is a scientific community can be there. I don't know, like another point was he said, well, scientists, they don't argue, they just wait for the evidence to come in. And I thought that was a good point. But then when it came to global warming, he got really upset. He said that, and then they said, well, if you question global warming, they don't rely on the science. But it's like everything he brought up, there's already well-established science about it. He just didn't want to learn it on his own. He felt like he should be convinced personally, or else the science is wrong. It was completely an unscientific viewpoint about global warming. And to me, that's completely fascinating, because it shows that global warming, it challenges science as a whole. And this is something I've been saying since my 2012 book. But it's actually, Slavoj Žižek, he made this claim, but he himself doesn't really take it that seriously, which is kind of ironic. But well, he put it in psychoanalysis terms. He's like, it's going to cause the ecological crisis, will cause the collapse of the big self, by which he means the superego of society. But then but then he doesn't really take it seriously, the ecological crisis, because it's much, much worse than the typical like leftist activist or whatever can even confront. So yeah, most people are still very much trying to do what they normally do, like make more money and make a nice commodity in the market and everything. But Naomi Oreskes, her big point is that the market cannot solve global warming, and that's precisely why these scientists have attacked the global warming science, is because they believe in the free market ideology of capitalism and as the free market as part of democracy. Like they think that freedom of democracy requires a free market. But as Naomi Oreskes points out, that's just a economic bias that unfortunately is not able to muster the required policy changes and institutional changes for global warming, whatever needs to be implemented. Anyway, this is my half-hour middle of the night whisper session. And I want to thank Luca Turin, because I already knew about his quantum smell frequency. It's described in the Life on the Edge, which was a book about quantum biology from 2016, so almost 10 years ago now. And he basically explained how the term quantum biology was just something he coined, actually. But it doesn't really exist as a discipline in science yet. So it's kind of fascinating. And he says that he gets papers submitted on quantum biology, and they're like almost all of them are just terrible. But nevertheless, Basil J. Hiley says that quantum biology has been wrong because it ignores non-commutativity. And so I agree with Basil J. Hiley, and I think that Luca Turin needs to start studying non-commutativity. Anyway, thanks.